Isolde Mercer stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Miami penthouse, watching her 5-year-old son Marcus build elaborate castle fortresses with his toy blocks on the Persian rug below. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across his concentrated face as he carefully placed each piece, his small tongue poking out in determination. For the third time this week, he had asked her the question that made her heart fracture a little more each time. "Why don't I have a daddy like the other kids, Mama?" The innocence in his voice when he asked always cut deeper than any business negotiation or territorial dispute she had ever faced. Marcus deserved better than the fractured world she had built around them, better than being the son of Miami's most powerful crime boss, with no father figure to balance the darkness that inevitably touched their lives. She thought of his biological father, Ricardo, who had disappeared the moment she told him about the pregnancy 5 years ago. One phone call, one conversation about taking responsibility, and he had vanished like smoke in the ocean breeze. She had been 25 then, naive enough to believe that love and attraction could overcome fear and commitment. Now, watching Marcus carefully arrange his toy soldiers around his castle walls, she understood that some men simply were not built for the weight of fatherhood. The irony wasn't lost on her that she commanded respect from the most dangerous people in 3 states. Yet she couldn't give her son the one thing he wanted most. Marcus had everything money could provide: private tutors, security details disguised as playmates, access to experiences most children only dreamed of, but none of that filled the void left by an absent father. "I'm watching from Atlanta tonight, and I can already feel the heartbreak coming in this story. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know if you've ever seen a mother make impossible choices for her child's happiness." Last Tuesday at the Little Haiti Community Center, she had observed Marcus during his weekly visit with other children from the neighborhood. While the other kids ran to fathers picking them up after activities, Marcus lingered with the elderly volunteer coordinator, soaking up any positive male attention like a plant desperate for sunlight. The coordinator, Papa Jean, had mentioned how Marcus always asked the adult men questions about their work, their hobbies, anything to extend those conversations a few precious minutes longer. That night, lying awake in the silence of her bedroom, Isolde had made a decision that went against every maternal instinct she possessed. Marcus needed a father figure, and she would find him one, even if it meant sacrificing her own preferences and desires. Even if it meant entering into a marriage that served strategy more than love. The call had come through her business channels the following morning. Cashin Kane, leader of a growing operation in Orlando, had been seeking alliance opportunities with established Miami families. His representatives spoke of mutual benefit, shared territories, combined resources. They also mentioned, almost casually, that Cashin was unmarried and looking for a wife who understood the complexities of their world. Isolde had agreed to the introduction meeting before she could second-guess herself. Cashin was handsome enough, well-dressed and articulate, with the kind of polished confidence that came from success and power. During their first dinner at a discreet restaurant in South Beach, he had spoken about expanding his influence, building lasting partnerships, creating something bigger than either of their individual operations. He had barely asked about Marcus. When she mentioned her son, Cashin's responses had been polite but distant, the kind of acknowledgement someone gives to an inconvenient detail they prefer not to discuss. He spoke of children as eventual assets, future heirs to whatever empire they might build together, but never as the vibrant, curious, loving little boy who currently dominated Isolde's every decision. Still, Cashin seemed stable, successful, and willing to provide the structure Marcus craved. During their second meeting, he had mentioned enjoying the idea of a ready-made family, of stepping into a leadership role that encompassed both business and domestic responsibilities. His words felt rehearsed, calculated for maximum appeal, but Isolde chose to focus on their practical value rather than their emotional authenticity. The proposal had been as strategic as their negotiations. Cashin had presented her with a detailed outline of how their marriage would benefit both operations, complete with territory divisions, revenue projections, and security protocols. The engagement ring, a flawless 3-carat diamond set in platinum, came with documentation proving its value for insurance purposes. Everything about their arrangement emphasized business efficiency over romantic sentiment. Marcus had been cautiously excited when Isolde told him about the upcoming wedding. He asked careful questions about whether Cashin would teach him to throw a baseball, whether they would read bedtime stories together, whether Cashin would attend his school events like other fathers did. Isolde had answered with optimistic reassurances, hoping that marriage would somehow transform Cashin's polite indifference into genuine paternal affection. Now, just 2 weeks before the wedding, doubts gnawed at her resolve like termites in the foundation of a beautiful building. Cashin's interactions with Marcus remained superficial, brief conversations that felt more like obligations than connections. When Marcus showed him drawings or school projects, Cashin's praise sounded hollow, the kind of generic encouragement adults give to children they barely know. But Marcus deserved a father, and Cashin was willing to provide stability, security, and the family structure her son craved. Sometimes, Isolde told herself, love grew from commitment rather than the other way around. Sometimes, the best choice wasn't the one that felt right immediately, but the one that promised the best long-term outcome. 800 guests would witness their wedding next Saturday at the Fontainebleau Hotel. Crime families from across the Southeast would attend, cementing alliances and recognizing the new power structure their marriage created. The ceremony would be live-streamed to international audiences, announcing their partnership to criminal organizations worldwide. Marcus had been practicing walking down the aisle with the rings, his small face glowing with anticipation as he prepared to fulfill his role in giving his mother away to the man who would become his father. His excitement was infectious, reminding Isolde why she was making this sacrifice in the first place. Whatever doubts she harbored about Cashin's character, whatever instincts warned her that something fundamental was missing from their connection, she would bury them for Marcus's sake. Her son deserved the chance to call someone daddy, to have a male role model who would guide him through the complexities of growing up in their world. As she watched Marcus add the final tower to his castle, complete with flags and tiny guards protecting the entrance, Isolde silently promised that she would make this marriage work. For him, she would find a way to bridge the gap between Cashin's calculated interest and the genuine fatherly love Marcus deserved. In just 8 days, everything would change. Marcus would finally have his father, and she would have secured his future, even if it meant sacrificing her own dreams of finding love that felt as natural as breathing. Sometimes, being a mother meant choosing your child's happiness over your own heart, and Isolde was prepared to make that choice as many times as necessary. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of crystalline Miami sunshine that made everything look like a postcard, but Isolde felt storm clouds gathering in her chest as she watched the endless parade of black SUVs and luxury sedans pulling up to the Fontainebleau Hotel. 800 of the most dangerous people in the criminal underworld were converging on Miami Beach to witness her marriage to Cashin Kane. And with each arriving guest, the weight of what she was about to do pressed heavier on her shoulders. Marcus bounced on his toes beside the window of their penthouse suite, his small hands pressed against the glass as he counted the cars below. His ring-bearer outfit hung perfectly pressed on the chair behind them, a miniature tuxedo that made him look impossibly grown-up and heartbreakingly young at the same time. He had been awake since 5 in the morning, too excited about finally getting a daddy to sleep through the night. "Look, Mama," he said, pointing to a convoy of motorcycles escorting a stretch limousine. "Those must be the people from Jacksonville that Papa Cashin told us about. Do you think they brought their kids too?" Isolde smoothed his hair, still damp from his morning shower and smelling like the expensive children's shampoo she had imported from France. "Most of these people don't bring their children to weddings like this, baby. This is more like a business meeting that happens to have cake and dancing. But it's also when you marry Papa Cashin and I get to be part of a real family, right?" Marcus turned his bright eyes up to her, and she felt her heart clench at the pure hope radiating from his small face. "After today, I can call him Daddy instead of Mr. Kane?" The formal distance Cashin insisted Marcus maintain had been another red flag Isolde had chosen to ignore. Even during their engagement, he had corrected Marcus every time the boy slipped and called him anything approaching paternal. Mr. Kane was appropriate until after the ceremony, he had explained, because respect and proper boundaries were important in their world. "Yes, sweetheart," Isolde said, forcing brightness into her voice that she didn't feel. "After today, everything changes." 3 floors below them, The hotel's grand ballroom was being transformed into something between a fairy tale and a fortress. Crystal chandeliers hung over round tables draped in ivory silk, while armed security personnel positioned themselves at every entrance and exit. The wedding planners worked around men carrying concealed weapons and women whose jewelry could fund small countries, creating an atmosphere that was elegant, dangerous, and surreal. The livestream equipment had been installed overnight, cameras positioned to capture every angle of the ceremony for the international audience that would be watching from Seoul, Naples, Moscow, and a dozen other cities where criminal organizations maintained interest in American territorial arrangements. Isolde's marriage to Cashin would be broadcast to crime families across the globe, cementing alliances and announcing the birth of a new power structure in the southeastern United States. A knock on the suite door interrupted her thoughts, and Marcus raced to answer it before she could remind him about security protocols. Through the peephole, she saw Cashin standing in the hallway with three of his closest associates, all of them dressed in matching dark suits that made them look like a corporate delegation rather than the violent men she knew them to be. Marcus flung the door open and launched himself toward Cashin with the enthusiasm of a child who had been waiting his entire life for this moment. "Papa Cashin, you're here. I've been practicing walking really slowly like you showed me, and I made you something special for today." Cashin stepped back slightly, accepting Marcus's hug with the mechanical politeness of someone tolerating a mildly annoying obligation. "Good morning, Marcus. I trust you slept well and are prepared for your responsibilities today." The formal tone he used with her 5-year-old son made Isolde's teeth clench, but she forced a smile as Cashin's associates filed into the suite behind him. These were the men who would help run their combined operation after the wedding, hard-faced individuals who had built their careers on violence and intimidation. She noticed how none of them acknowledged Marcus's presence, treating him like an invisible inconvenience rather than the future stepson of their boss. "I brought my card," Marcus announced, pulling a folded piece of construction paper from his pocket with the careful reverence of someone presenting a priceless artifact. "I made it myself, and Mama helped me with the spelling. Do you want to see it?" Cashin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as Marcus unfolded the homemade card, revealing a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. In unsteady 5-year-old handwriting, the message read, "Thank you for being my new daddy. I love you already." Marcus had signed it with a careful M that took up nearly a quarter of the page. "That's very nice, Marcus," Cashin said, glancing at the card for perhaps 2 seconds before setting it aside on the nearest table. "You can give me things like this after the ceremony. Right now, the adults need to discuss business." Marcus's face fell so quickly that Isolde felt something crack inside her chest. The boy had worked on that card for 3 days, choosing every color with deliberate care, practicing the letters over and over until they were as perfect as his small hands could make them. To watch Cashin dismiss it like junk mail was to see her son's excitement crumble in real time. "Actually," Isolde said, moving to stand beside Marcus and picking up the discarded card, "I think this is beautiful, baby. Your new daddy is probably just nervous about the wedding. Men get nervous about big days like this, just like we do." She shot Cashin a look that could have melted steel, but he was already deep in conversation with his associates about security protocols and guest list management. None of them seemed to notice or care that a small boy had just been casually crushed by the man he was preparing to call father. Marcus nodded solemnly, accepting her explanation with the resilience that broke her heart and amazed her in equal measure. "He's probably thinking about all the important people coming to see us become a family. I'll just be extra good today, so he doesn't have to worry about me too." Over the next hour, as photographers arrived to capture pre-wedding portraits in the suite filled with makeup artists, hairstylists, and wedding coordinators, Isolde found herself watching Cashin's interactions with Marcus with growing unease. Every exchange felt performed rather than genuine, as if Cashin was playing a role he had studied but never truly understood. When the photographer suggested some casual shots of the groom and future stepson together, Cashin's smile looked painted on, his body language stiff and uncomfortable. He placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder with the same mechanical precision he used for business handshakes, and when Marcus spontaneously hugged his leg during one shot, Cashin's expression flickered with what looked suspiciously like irritation. During a quiet moment when Marcus was being fitted for his final wardrobe adjustments, Isolde overheard a conversation between two of Cashin's friends that made her blood run cold. They were standing near the balcony doors, speaking in low voices they apparently thought she couldn't hear over the wedding preparation chaos. "Can't believe he's actually going through with this," one of them muttered, a thin man with dead eyes and expensive cologne, saddling himself with some other man's kid just to get access to her territory and connections. The second man, shorter but somehow more menacing, chuckled darkly. "You know Cashin. He'll do whatever it takes to build his empire. Once the honeymoon's over and the territories are merged, he can always find ways to minimize the family obligations. Kids are easy to ignore when you control their mother's business interests." Isolde felt the room tilt sideways as the implications of their words hit her like a physical blow. These men were talking about her son like he was an unfortunate business expense, a complication to be managed rather than a child to be loved and protected. Worse, they spoke as if Cashin's indifference toward Marcus was not only expected but planned. She glanced toward Marcus, who was standing on a small platform while the tailor made final adjustments to his tiny tuxedo, his face glowing with anticipation for the ceremony that would make him part of a real family. He had no idea that the men planning to be his new father and uncles viewed him as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. The photographer called for final portraits, and Isolde forced herself to smile for the cameras while her mind raced through calculations and contingencies. 800 guests were already seated downstairs. International crime families were watching via live stream. Contracts had been signed, territories had been promised, and alliances had been announced. But as she watched Marcus carefully pick up the ring pillow and practice his measured walk one more time, she realized that no business deal was worth sacrificing her son's emotional well-being. No alliance was valuable enough to trap Marcus in a household where he would be tolerated rather than cherished. The wedding coordinator appeared at her elbow with a clipboard and an urgent expression. "Mrs. Mercer, it's time. The processional begins in 5 minutes. Are you ready?" Marcus looked up at her with shining eyes, clutching his ring pillow like a treasure, completely unaware that his future stepfather had already dismissed him as an inconvenient complication. In that moment, Isolde realized she was about to make the biggest mistake of both their lives. But the machinery of the wedding was already in motion, and 800 dangerous people were waiting downstairs to witness the alliance that would reshape the criminal landscape of the Southeast. She took Marcus's free hand and squeezed it gently. "Are you ready to walk down that aisle, baby?" "Yes, Mama," he whispered, practically vibrating with excitement. "I've been ready my whole life." The grand ballroom of the Fontainebleau Hotel had been transformed into something between a cathedral and a courthouse, 800 of the most dangerous people in the criminal underworld filling every seat, while cameras positioned at strategic angles prepared to broadcast this moment to crime families across 3 continents. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, but the atmosphere crackled with the tension that always surrounded gatherings where so much power and violence converged in one space. Marcus stood at the back of the ballroom beside Isolde, clutching his ring pillow with both hands and practically bouncing on his toes with excitement. His miniature tuxedo had been tailored to perfection, making him look like a tiny gentleman preparing for the most important job of his young life. He had been practicing his slow, measured walk for weeks, determined to make his new daddy proud by performing his ring-bearer duties flawlessly. The string quartet began the processional music, and Marcus looked up at Isolde with eyes shining like stars. "This is it, Mama. After today, I get to call him Daddy, and we're going to be a real family." Isolde smoothed his hair one final time, her heart clenching at the pure joy radiating from his small face. "Be careful with those rings, baby. Walk slowly like we practiced, and remember that everyone here is watching because this is such a special day." Marcus nodded solemnly, then began his measured journey down the white carpet runner that stretched between 800 pairs of eyes. Every step was deliberate and careful, his small shoulders squared with the gravity of his responsibility. Crime bosses from Jacksonville, Atlanta, New Orleans, and beyond watched this 5-year-old boy carry the symbols of his mother's marriage to the man he believed would become his father. Cashin stood waiting at the altar in a charcoal gray tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars, his expression composed and businesslike as he watched Marcus approach. But Isolde noticed the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly when Marcus beamed up at him with unconditional trust and love. Even now, at the moment when he should be embracing his new role as stepfather, Cassian looked like a man enduring an unpleasant obligation. When Marcus reached the altar, he turned to face the audience with the ring pillow held proudly in front of him, his small chest puffed out with the importance of his role. The 800 guests, hardened criminals who had seen every form of violence and betrayal imaginable, found themselves charmed by this innocent child's obvious happiness. Even some of the most ruthless men in the room smiled slightly at Marcus's earnest concentration. The music swelled as Isolde began her own walk down the aisle, her silk wedding gown flowing behind her like liquid moonlight. She had chosen elegance over extravagance, wanting to look worthy of the alliance she was creating rather than like a woman trying too hard to capture a man's attention. But as she moved toward Cassian, she caught glimpses of his expression that made her stomach clench with dread. He wasn't looking at her with love or even satisfied attraction. He was studying her with the cold calculation of a businessman evaluating an asset he was beginning to suspect might not be worth the investment. His gaze traveled over her dress, her figure, her face, and she could almost see him tallying perceived flaws against expected benefits. When Isolde reached the altar, Cassian's smile looked painted on, a corporate expression designed to satisfy the watching crowd rather than communicate any genuine emotion. Marcus stood between them, still clutching his ring pillow and glowing with anticipation as the minister opened his ceremonial book and began to speak. "Dearly beloved," the minister intoned, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Cassian Kane and Isolde Mercer, and to celebrate the formation of a new family that includes young Marcus, who will be blessed with a loving stepfather and the security of a complete home." Marcus's smile grew even brighter at the mention of gaining a stepfather, and he looked up at Cassian with such pure adoration that several women in the audience felt their hearts clench. This was a child who had waited his entire short life for this moment, who had dreamed of having a daddy like all the other kids, who had practiced saying the word until it felt natural on his tongue. The minister continued with the traditional questions about commitment and faithfulness, but when he reached the part about accepting responsibility for Marcus as well as Isolde, something shifted in Cassian's expression. The painted-in smile faltered, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like panic mixed with disgust. "Cassian Kane, do you take Isolde Mercer to be your lawfully wedded wife? And do you accept young Marcus as your stepson, promising to love, guide, and protect him as your own child?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Cassian's silence stretched far longer than it should have. 800 guests began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something was going wrong. The live-stream cameras continued rolling, broadcasting this moment of hesitation to criminal organizations worldwide. Marcus looked up at Cassian with complete trust, waiting for the yes that would make all his dreams come true. But instead of the affirmation everyone expected, Cassian took a step backward, his face twisting into an expression of revulsion that made several people gasp audibly. "I can't do this," Cassian announced, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. "I thought I could, but I can't saddle myself with damaged goods and someone else's baggage." The words hit the room like a physical blow. 800 dangerous people sat in stunned silence, while Marcus's face crumpled in confusion. Damaged goods? What did that mean? Why was his new daddy saying such strange, angry-sounding words? "Look at her," Cassian continued, his voice gaining strength as he pointed directly at Isolde with unconcealed disgust. "This is what happens when women have children out of wedlock. Stretch marks, loose skin, a body that shows every mistake she's ever made. And that kid is living proof of her bad choices, a constant reminder that she gave herself to some other man first." The cruelty of his words struck the assembled crowd like lightning. These were people accustomed to violence, betrayal, and every form of human darkness. But the sight of a 5-year-old boy being publicly rejected and humiliated by the man he had been calling Papa Cassian created a silence so complete that the sound of Marcus's first sob echoed like a gunshot. "I don't want damaged merchandise," Cassian declared, his voice now loud enough for the livestream audience to hear every syllable clearly. I don't want a wife whose body tells the story of another man's pleasure, and I definitely don't want to pretend to love some other guy's kid who's going to be a burden and an expense for the rest of my life. Marcus dropped the ring pillow, the wedding bands scattering across the marble floor as he began to cry in earnest. The confusion in his small voice broke hearts throughout the ballroom as he looked between his mother and the man who was supposed to become his father. Mama, why is Papa Cashin saying mean things? Did I do something wrong with the rings? Isolde felt something primal and volcanic rise from the depths of her being. A maternal fury so pure and consuming that it threatened to incinerate everything in its path. This man had just destroyed her innocent child in front of 800 witnesses and an international audience, had taken Marcus's greatest dream and turned it into his worst nightmare, all because of his own shallow vanity and calculated cruelty. "You coward," she whispered, her voice barely audible but somehow carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "You absolute coward." Cashin was already turning away, gesturing to his security detail to clear a path toward the exit. The alliance he had promised, the merger he had negotiated, the future he had outlined in detailed business proposals, all of it crumbling because he couldn't handle the reality of becoming a stepfather to a child who needed him. "Mama," Marcus sobbed, reaching up to clutch at Isolde's wedding dress. "Why doesn't he want to be my daddy anymore? What did I do wrong?" The livestream cameras continued rolling, broadcasting this moment of devastating rejection to crime families across the globe. 800 of the most powerful criminals in the southeastern United States watched a 5-year-old boy's heartbreak in real time, witnessed a mother's dignity shattered in front of the people whose respect she needed to maintain her position and authority. Security personnel began moving toward Cashin to escort him safely from the building, but the damage was already complete. Marcus stood amid the scattered wedding rings, his tiny tuxedo wrinkled from clutching at his mother's dress, his face streaked with tears as he tried to understand why his dreams of having a father had just exploded into nightmare. "You'll pay for this," Isolde said, her voice now carrying the cold promise of someone who had built an empire on the principle that disrespect always carried consequences. "You'll pay for hurting my son." But even as she made the threat, she knew that no amount of revenge could undo what had just happened. Marcus had been humiliated in front of 800 witnesses, his innocent trust shattered by a man too selfish and shallow to recognize the gift being offered to him. The live stream had broadcast his rejection across the globe, making this moment of devastation part of criminal history. Marcus looked up at her with eyes full of tears and confusion, his small voice breaking as he asked the question that would haunt her for years to come. "Mama, was it because I'm not good enough? Is that why he doesn't want to be my daddy?" Isolde knelt beside her son on the marble floor, gathering him into her arms as 800 dangerous people watched the most powerful woman in Miami hold her broken child while her own world collapsed around them. The wedding was over, the alliance was destroyed, and Marcus's faith in the possibility of finding a father figure lay shattered like the rings scattered at their feet. But somewhere in the back of her mind, even as she comforted her devastated son, Isolde registered the sound of helicopters approaching the hotel, the rumble of motorcycle engines, the kind of coordinated arrival that meant someone very powerful was about to make an entrance. Someone who apparently hadn't been invited to witness this disaster, but was coming anyway. The sound of helicopters grew louder, their rotors creating a thunderous percussion that vibrated through the crystal chandeliers and made the windows of the Fontainebleau ballroom tremble. 800 guests turned toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Miami Beach, watching as a fleet of black military-style aircraft descended toward the hotel's private landing areas like mechanical birds of prey. Marcus was still sobbing in Isolde's arms, his small body shaking with the kind of grief that only children experience when their deepest hopes are crushed without warning or explanation. His tiny tuxedo was wrinkled and tear-stained, the ring pillow lying forgotten on the marble floor beside them along with the scattered wedding bands that would never fulfill their purpose. "Why doesn't anyone want to be my daddy, Mama?" he whispered against her shoulder, his voice muffled but audible enough that several nearby guests felt their hearts break at the raw pain in those young words. "Am I really not good enough?" Before Isolde could answer, The ballroom's main doors burst open with a force that made everyone in the room instantly alert. 50 men in dark suits flowed into the space with military precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful as they positioned themselves at every entrance and exit. These weren't hotel security or local law enforcement. These were private soldiers, the kind of disciplined professionals who answered only to someone with serious power and unlimited resources. The crime bosses in the audience recognized the display immediately. This was how emperors traveled, how men who controlled territories spanning multiple countries announced their presence. Conversations died completely as 800 of the most dangerous people in the southeastern United States found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by whoever had just decided to crash the wedding. Behind the advance team came a man who commanded attention simply by existing in the same space as other people. Cale Voss moved through the ballroom like he owned not just the building but the entire city surrounding it, his presence so magnetic that even hardened criminals found themselves staring. He was tall without being imposing, well-dressed without being ostentatious, but something in his bearing suggested that he could reshape the world around him with nothing more than focused intention. What made the moment truly remarkable was that he completely ignored every adult in the room. His gaze swept past Isolde, past the fleeing Cashin, past the assembled crime bosses who represented billions in criminal enterprise, and locked directly onto the small boy crying in his mother's arms. Marcus felt the weight of that attention and looked up from Isolde's shoulder, his tear-streaked face turning toward this stranger who had arrived like something from one of his superhero movies. The man was walking directly toward him, not toward his mother or any of the important adults, but toward him specifically, as if Marcus was the most important person in the entire ballroom. Cale stopped about 10 feet away and began removing his expensive suit jacket, folding it carefully before setting it aside. The gesture was deliberate and symbolic, a powerful man literally lowering his defenses in the presence of a child. Then, to the amazement of everyone watching, he lowered himself to one knee on the marble floor, bringing his eye level down to match Marcus's. The sight of one of the most feared men in the criminal underworld kneeling in a designer suit to speak with a 5-year-old created a silence so profound that the only sounds in the ballroom were the distant helicopter rotors and Marcus's gradually quieting sobs. Crime bosses who had never shown deference to anyone watched a man worth hundreds of millions humble himself before a heartbroken child. "Hey there," Cale said, his voice gentle but carrying clearly through the crystalline acoustics of the ballroom. "My name is Cale, and I couldn't help but notice that you're having the worst day of your whole life." Marcus wiped his nose with the back of his hand, studying this stranger who spoke to him like he was a real person instead of a burden or an inconvenience. "You're not supposed to kneel in fancy clothes," he said quietly, his natural politeness asserting itself even through his tears. "Mama says expensive suits get ruined when you kneel on the floor." Cale smiled, and something about that expression made him look younger and more approachable despite his obvious power. "Suits can be replaced, buddy. Little boys who are sad are much more important than clothes, no matter how expensive they are." The simple declaration rippled through the watching crowd like a shockwave. Here was a man who could buy and sell most of the people in the room, and he was telling a crying child that his feelings mattered more than material possessions. Several of the women in the audience felt unexpected tears prick their eyes at the genuine warmth in Cale's voice. "I heard what happened here today," Cale continued, still maintaining eye contact with Marcus while completely ignoring the 800 adults watching their interaction. "I heard that someone was very mean to you and your mama, and I want you to know that what he said wasn't true. Sometimes grown-ups say terrible things when they're scared or confused, but that doesn't make those things real." Marcus sniffled, his crying beginning to slow as this stranger's words penetrated through his confusion and hurt. "He said me and Mama are damaged goods and that nobody wants us. He said I'm just baggage that makes everything harder." The words sounded even worse coming from Marcus's innocent lips, and several people in the audience audibly gasped at the cruelty being repeated by a 5-year-old who barely understood what the phrases meant. Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained gentle and reassuring when he responded. "Marcus, can I tell you something really important about families and fathers, and all that complicated grown-up stuff?" Marcus nodded, wiping his eyes again, but beginning to sit up straighter as this stranger's calm presence started to make him feel safer and less alone. The best fathers in the whole world aren't the ones who just happen to share your blood, Cale explained, his words chosen carefully for a child's understanding, but carrying weight that the adult audience felt deeply. The best fathers are the ones who choose you, who look at you and decide that they want to be part of your life forever. Those kinds of fathers are special because they're picking you on purpose, not just because they have to. Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully, processing this new concept with the serious concentration that only children bring to life-changing information. Like how Mama chose me when she decided to keep me even though my first daddy ran away. Exactly like that, Cale confirmed, and his smile grew warmer as Marcus demonstrated the quick intelligence that Isolde had always been proud of. Your mama chose to love you every single day, which makes her the best kind of parent. And fathers who choose their kids are even more special than the regular kind, because they're making a decision with their hearts instead of just accepting what they're stuck with. The ballroom remained completely silent as 800 dangerous people watched this conversation unfold. Many of them had children, and most had never seen a child treated with such respectful attention by someone with real power. Cale was speaking to Marcus like his thoughts and feelings mattered, like he was a complete person worthy of serious consideration. Marcus looked up at Isolde, who was watching this interaction with growing amazement and hope. Mama, this man is really nice, and he's not talking to me like I'm stupid or in the way. Before Isolde could respond, Cale asked the question that would change everything. Marcus, would it be okay if I asked your mama if I could be your daddy? Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because I think you're exactly the kind of kid who deserves a father who chooses him on purpose. The question hung in the air like magic, transforming the atmosphere of the entire ballroom. 800 witnesses held their breath as a 5-year-old boy considered an offer that could reshape not just his life, but the entire criminal landscape of the southeastern United States. Marcus looked between Cale and his mother, his young mind working through the implications of what was being offered. You really want to be my daddy? Even though I'm not yours, and I might be trouble sometimes, and I ask too many questions? Especially because you ask questions, Cale said, laughing softly. Smart kids who want to understand the world make the best sons, and I've been looking my whole life for someone exactly like you. The only question is whether you think I might be good enough to be your father. The reversal was stunning. Instead of Marcus having to prove his worthiness to gain a father, this powerful stranger was asking if he measured up to Marcus's standards. The shift in power dynamics was so complete that several people in the audience felt tears they hadn't expected. Marcus considered the question with the gravity it deserved, studying Cale's face for any sign of the falseness he had sensed in Cashin's promises. What he found there was patience, genuine interest, and something that looked like hope mixed with determination. Finally, Marcus's face broke into the first real smile he had shown since the disaster began. Yes, he said quietly, then louder with growing confidence. Yes, I think you would be a really good daddy. You're already nicer to me than anyone except Mama has ever been. The ballroom erupted in whispers and murmurs as the implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. Cale Voss, one of the most powerful men in the criminal underworld, had just asked a 5-year-old boy for permission to join his family, and the boy had said yes. Cale stood slowly, extending his hand to Marcus, who took it without hesitation. Now I need to ask your mama if she thinks this is a good idea too, he said, finally turning his attention to Isolde, who had been watching this entire exchange with growing wonder and hope. But as he looked at her, Cale's expression communicated something that made Isolde's heart start beating faster. This wasn't just about giving Marcus a father figure. This was about choosing them, about building something real and lasting, about creating a family based on conscious decision rather than convenience or strategy. The man who had just knelt on a marble floor to ask her son's permission was offering them both a chance at something Isolde had never dared to hope for. A partnership built on genuine care rather than calculated advantage, love that was chosen rather than arranged, protection that came from the heart rather than a business contract. Marcus looked up at Cale with eyes that had transformed from devastated to hopeful in the span of a single conversation, and when he whispered his answer, the words carried such pure sincerity that they seemed to echo through the hearts of everyone watching. Yes, I want you to be my daddy. I want that more than anything in the whole world." What happened next would become legend among the criminal families who witnessed it. Marcus, still small enough that Cale towered over him even while kneeling, suddenly launched himself forward and wrapped his arms around Cale's neck in a hug so spontaneous and fierce that it caught even the prepared crime lord off guard. The embrace lasted only seconds, but in those moments, 800 of the most dangerous people in the southeastern United States watched a 5-year-old boy claim his chosen father with the kind of absolute trust that made hardened criminals remember what innocence looked like. Cale's arms came up to return the hug with surprising gentleness, his large hands careful against Marcus's small back as if he understood he was holding something precious and fragile. When they separated, Cale lifted Marcus easily, settling the boy on his hip with the natural ease of someone who had always known how to be around children. "Now comes the really important part," Cale said, carrying Marcus toward where Isolde still knelt on the marble floor amid the scattered wedding rings. "I need to ask your mama if she thinks this crazy idea might work. What do you think she'll say?" Marcus giggled, the sound bright and musical after so much crying, and the contrast was so stark that several women in the audience felt their own tears begin to fall. "Mama always says that the best things in life come from places you don't expect. I think she's going to say yes, because you make me happy and nobody's made me this happy in my whole life." Cale approached Isolde with Marcus still balanced on his hip, and the sight of them together, this powerful man and her small son, created a picture that felt both surreal and perfectly right. When he stopped in front of her and slowly lowered himself to one knee again, this time bringing Marcus down with him, the gesture carried the weight of a formal proposal, but one that included all three of them rather than just two. "Isolde Mercer," Cale said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics so that every witness could hear the words that would reshape the criminal landscape of the Southeast. "I'm not here to offer you a business arrangement or a strategic alliance. I'm here to ask if you would allow me the honor of becoming part of your family, of being the father Marcus deserves and the partner you've never had the chance to choose freely." The contrast with Cashin's calculated proposal was so stark that it felt like comparing candlelight to the sun. Where Cashin had presented spreadsheets and territory maps, Cale was offering his heart. Where Cashin had viewed Marcus as an inconvenient complication, Cale had approached the boy first, seeking his blessing before even addressing the adults. Isolde looked between Cale and Marcus, seeing her son's face glowing with happiness for the first time since he had started asking why he didn't have a daddy like other kids. This stranger had accomplished in 10 minutes what months of marriage planning with Cashin had never achieved. He had made Marcus feel wanted, valued, and worthy of love. "I don't understand," Isolde said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach the front rows of seated guests. "You don't know us. You don't know what you'd be taking on, what complications come with our lives, what enemies we might bring to your door." Cale's smile was warm and absolutely certain. "I know that Marcus is brave enough to stand up in front of 800 strangers and carry wedding rings for a man who didn't deserve him. I know that you're strong enough to build an empire while raising a son alone. I know that both of you just survived the worst kind of public humiliation with more grace and dignity than most people show on their best days. What else do I need to know?" The simplicity of his answer, the way he framed their perceived weaknesses as strengths, made Isolde's chest tighten with emotions she couldn't name. Marcus bounced slightly in Cale's arms, unable to contain his excitement as he watched his mother consider the offer that would change all their lives. "Mama," he said urgently, "he already likes me exactly how I am. He doesn't want me to be different or quieter or less curious. He thinks I ask good questions instead of too many questions. And look how gentle he is, even though he's really strong and important." It was true. Despite his obvious power and the 50 armed men positioned throughout the ballroom at his command, Cale held Marcus like he was made of spun glass, his attention focused completely on the conversation as if nothing else in the world mattered more than this moment with her and her son. The ballroom held its collective breath as Isolde made the decision that would alter the balance of power across multiple states and countless criminal organizations. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had never been given anything she hadn't earned, but also the wonder of someone discovering that some gifts came without strings attached. "Yes," she said simply, Then louder as she rose to her feet. Yes, I think that would be exactly what we both need. Marcus let out a whoop of joy that made everyone in the ballroom smile despite themselves, and Cale stood as well, shifting the boy to his other arm so he could extend his free hand to Isolde. When she took it, the connection felt electric, not just between them, but rippling out through the entire assembled crowd, who understood they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented. "Does this mean we're a family now?" Cale asked Marcus, his voice playful, but carrying an undertone of genuine emotion that made the question feel like a sacred vow. "Does this mean I get to be your daddy starting right now?" "Yes," Marcus declared with 5-year-old certainty, wrapping his arms around Cale's neck again. "You're my daddy now and forever and always, and nobody can say we're not a real family, because we chose each other on purpose." The declaration rippled through the watching crime bosses like an earthquake, because everyone understood the implications of what they had just witnessed. Cale Voss, whose territory stretched from Tampa to the Carolinas, had just allied himself with Isolde Mercer's Miami operation through marriage, but not the cold strategic marriage they had expected to see. This was something far more dangerous to their established power structures. This was an alliance built on genuine loyalty and protection rather than convenience and profit. "I think we should make this official," Cale announced, still holding Marcus while keeping Isolde's hand firmly in his. "Not with another wedding that can be interrupted by small-minded people, but with something that matters more. Marcus, as my son, would you like to walk out of here with me and your mother and show everyone that we're a family now?" Marcus practically glowed with pride and happiness. "Can I hold both your hands while we walk, like a real family does in the movies?" Cale exchanged a look with Isolde that communicated volumes about shared values, mutual respect, and the beginning of something that felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. "Of course we can hold hands," he said, lowering Marcus to the ground, but keeping him securely between the two adults. "That's exactly what real families do." The three of them turned toward the ballroom's main entrance, and as they began walking toward the doors, something extraordinary happened. The 800 guests, hardened criminals who had built their careers on violence and intimidation, rose to their feet in spontaneous acknowledgement of what they were witnessing. This wasn't applause for a business transaction. This was recognition of something authentic and powerful, the birth of a family that had chosen each other freely and publicly claimed their bond. Marcus walked between his mother and his new father, his small hands gripping theirs with absolute trust and joy, his steps lighter than they had been since Cashin's rejection began. Every few steps he would look up at one of them and smile, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune but was determined to enjoy every second of it. Cale's security detail moved with them, creating a protective perimeter that encompassed all three family members rather than just their primary target. The message was clear to everyone watching. Marcus and Isolde were now under the protection of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Southeast, not as assets or bargaining chips, but as beloved family members whose safety was now Cale's highest priority. As they reached the ballroom doors, Marcus tugged on both their hands to make them stop. He looked back at the assembled crowd, at the scattered wedding rings still lying on the marble floor where his first dreams had been shattered, and then up at his mother and new father with the wisdom that sometimes emerged from children who had experienced both profound disappointment and unexpected joy. "I'm glad the mean man said no," he announced loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear. "Because if he had said yes, we never would have found our real family. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you are really the best things in disguise." The simple profundity of the statement struck the watching crowd like lightning, because a 5-year-old boy had just articulated something that most adults spent lifetimes trying to understand. Sometimes rejection was protection, sometimes closed doors led to better paths, and sometimes the family you chose was stronger than the family you were given. Cale lifted Marcus again, settling him on his shoulders so the boy could see over the heads of all the adults as they walked through the hotel lobby toward their waiting convoy. Marcus laughed with pure delight at his new vantage point, his hands gripping Cale's hair for balance while he called down observations about everything he could see from his elevated position. Outside the Fontainebleau, a fleet of black SUVs waited alongside the helicopters that had announced Cale's arrival, but now they would be carrying a family of 3 instead of just one powerful man. As they approached the lead vehicle, Cale helped Marcus into the back seat before turning to assist Isolde, his hand at her elbow steady and protective. The drive away from the hotel became a celebration rather than an escape, with Marcus chattering excitedly about everything he wanted to show his new daddy, all the places they could go together, all the questions he had been saving up for when he finally found a father who actually wanted to hear the answers. Behind them, 800 crime bosses were left to process what they had witnessed, to recalculate power structures and alliance possibilities based on the understanding that the Southeast criminal landscape had just been permanently altered by a 5-year-old boy's decision to trust a stranger who had knelt down to meet him at eye level. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Marcus Voss raced through the marble hallways of their Miami Beach estate, his school backpack bouncing against his shoulders as he called out for his father with the kind of uninhibited joy that had become his default setting. The transformation in the little boy was so complete that visitors who had known him before sometimes did double takes, unable to reconcile the confident, happy child before them with the quietly desperate boy who had once asked why no one wanted to be his daddy. Papa Cale, he shouted, bursting through the doors of the home office where Cale conducted the legitimate side of their business operations. I got a gold star on my math test, and Mrs. Rodriguez wants to meet with you and Mama about the gifted program, and Tommy Martinez asked if you're really my dad, because I don't look like you, and I told him that the best dads pick their kids on purpose. Cale looked up from the architectural plans spread across his mahogany desk, plans for the third school they were building in underserved Miami neighborhoods, and his face broke into the kind of smile that had become automatic whenever Marcus entered a room. The business associates seated across from him, hardened men discussing security contracts and protective services, watched with amazement as one of the most feared crime lords in the Southeast dropped everything to give his full attention to a 6-year-old's excited chatter. A gold star in math and a recommendation for gifted classes, Cale said, standing and sweeping Marcus into a bear hug that lifted the boy's feet off the ground. That sounds like cause for celebration. What kind of celebration does a genius mathematician deserve? Ice cream for dinner and staying up past bedtime to watch the Science Channel, Marcus declared without hesitation, making the business associates chuckle despite themselves at his confident negotiation tactics. I think we can arrange something like that, but first you need to tell your mama about your good grades. She's going to be so proud that her brilliant son is showing everyone how smart Voss men are. The casual way Cale claimed Marcus as a Voss, the pride in his voice when he called the boy brilliant, created an atmosphere in the room that even criminal associates found moving. This wasn't performance or strategy. This was genuine paternal love expressed without reservation or calculation. Marcus beamed at being called a Voss man, straightening his small shoulders with pride before racing off to find Isolde with news of his academic success. The moment he left the room, Cale's business associates exchanged glances that communicated volumes about how the dynamics of their organization had changed since he had acquired a family. He's a good kid, one of them ventured, a scarred veteran who had worked for Cale for over a decade. Smart, polite, asks good questions. Nothing like what we expected when you first brought him home. The comment hung in the air because everyone in the room understood what hadn't been said. Most criminal organizations viewed family members as either assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be protected, but Marcus had somehow become both the heart of their operation and its moral compass. Decisions were now filtered through questions of what kind of world they wanted to leave for the next generation, what kind of example they were setting for a boy who believed his father was a hero. Cale had restructured their entire operation around the principle that strength came from protection rather than exploitation. Their territories now functioned more like neighborhood watch programs with serious firepower, offering security services to legitimate businesses while systematically eliminating the human trafficking, drug distribution, and loan sharking operations that had once formed the backbone of southeastern criminal enterprise. The transformation hadn't been without resistance. 3 months ago, Cash and Kane had attempted a reconciliation, arriving at their estate with expensive gifts for Marcus and a prepared speech about reconsidering their failed alliance. He had lasted exactly 30 minutes before Marcus himself had ended the conversation by politely but firmly telling the man who had once rejected him that he already had a real daddy now and didn't need a pretend one. Isolde had watched from the doorway as her 6-year-old son dismissed a grown man with the kind of quiet dignity that made her heart swell with pride. Marcus's confidence had been rebuilt so thoroughly that he no longer questioned his own worth or worried that people might not want him around. He knew he was loved, valued, and chosen, and that certainty radiated from him like sunlight. The adoption ceremony was scheduled for next week, a legal formality that would make official what had been true from the moment Cale knelt on a marble floor and asked for Marcus's permission to be his father. Judge Patricia Hernandez, a family court veteran who had seen every possible configuration of dysfunction and healing, had confided to Isolde that in 30 years on the bench, she had never seen a case where the bonds between family members were so obviously genuine and strong. Business associates and criminal families throughout the Southeast had learned to adjust their expectations when dealing with Cale's organization. Meetings now ended by 5 o'clock because he refused to miss Marcus's bedtime stories. Violence was no longer the first response to territorial disputes, partly because Marcus had overheard him explaining to Isolde that he wanted to build a world where children could grow up safely, and partly because the boy had asked too many uncomfortable questions about why some adults chose to hurt people instead of helping them. The legitimization of their operations had been surprisingly profitable, with their security and consulting services attracting clients who valued discretion and effectiveness over flashy displays of power. Corporate executives, politicians, and celebrities hired them for protection that was both invisible and absolute, services that commanded premium prices while avoiding the legal complications that came with traditional criminal activities. Tonight would be like most evenings in the Voss household, with Marcus insisting on helping prepare dinner while chattering about his day, Isolde reviewing the financial reports from their expanding legitimate enterprises, and Cale listening to his son's questions about everything from astronomy to marine biology with the patient attention of someone who had discovered that a child's curiosity was more entertaining than any form of adult conversation. The contrast with the life Marcus had known before couldn't have been more stark. Instead of wondering why no one wanted to be his father, he now complained that his daddy was too popular with other kids' parents and that everyone at school wanted to know if Papa Cale could teach their fathers how to build tree houses and fix bicycles and remember every single thing their children told them. Have you ever seen a love story that made you believe in the power of chosen family over blood family? This story shows how sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, and how authentic love can reshape not just individual lives, but entire communities. What's your favorite moment from Marcus, Isolde, and Cale's journey from strangers to an unbreakable family unit? During bedtime story time last week, Marcus had asked Cale what would have happened if the mean man at the wedding had actually married Mama instead of running away. Cale had considered the question with the seriousness it deserved before explaining that sometimes the universe had ways of protecting people from settling for less than they deserved, even when those people didn't understand they were being protected at the time. Marcus had nodded thoughtfully and declared that he was glad the universe was smart enough to save them for each other, because now they had the perfect family where everyone chose everyone else on purpose and nobody was stuck with anybody they didn't really want. The wisdom in that statement had stayed with both Cale and Isolde, becoming something of a family motto that guided their decisions both personal and professional. Their empire was built on the principle that loyalty earned through choice was stronger than obedience enforced through fear, that protecting people created more lasting power than controlling them ever could. The adoption ceremony next Tuesday would take place in the same courthouse where Cale and Isolde had been married 2 months after their first meeting. A small private ceremony attended by Judge Hernandez, 2 witnesses, and Marcus wearing a miniature version of his father's suit. When the paperwork was signed and the adoption was official, Marcus would legally become Marcus Mercer Voss, carrying both his mother's name and his chosen father's, a symbol of how love could create family bonds stronger than biology or law. That evening, as Cale tucked Marcus into bed in the room they had designed together, complete with a telescope for stargazing and walls covered with the boys' increasingly sophisticated artwork, Marcus made his nightly request for the story of how he got his daddy. It was a ritual now, this bedtime retelling of the day when everything changed, but Marcus never tired of hearing about the man who chose him first before even talking to the adults. And then Papa Cale knelt down to my size, Marcus would prompt, even though he knew every word by heart. And he asked if I thought he would be good enough to be my daddy instead of making me prove I was good enough to be his son. And what did you tell him? Cale would ask, playing his part in their established routine. I told him yes because he was already being nicer to me than anybody except Mama had ever been, and because he made me feel important instead of in the way. The story always ended the same way, with Marcus falling asleep secure in the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged, part of a family that had chosen each other freely and completely. Outside his bedroom window, the lights of Miami twinkled like stars, illuminating a city where their protection services kept neighborhoods safe, where their schools educated children who might otherwise fall through cracks, where their example had inspired other criminal families to question whether power built on fear was worth the cost. In 6 months, a 5-year-old boy's decision to trust a stranger who treated him with respect had reshaped the criminal landscape of the southeastern United States, proving that sometimes the smallest people could create the biggest changes when they were given the love and security they needed to believe in themselves. The Voss family had built an empire on the revolutionary concept that authentic love was more profitable than manufactured fear, that protection created more lasting loyalty than exploitation, and that children who grew up knowing they were chosen and valued could change the world in ways their parents never imagined possible.